Hey, welcome back to the MMA Prospectus. I'm Zane Simon. I'm joined by Tom Grant of Bloody Elbow. We've been trying to make sure that Tom's audio doesn't make him sound like some weird death-killing robot from the future, make him sound like a Dalek. Um, so bear with us if he does end up starting to yell "exterminate, exterminate," and you know
We've fixed
destroys
all the
several.
software glitches, Zane. All
Yeah,
the software glitches have been fixed.
all right, all the thought. So I think we finally got everything ironed out, which is great. Anyway, we're here to talk about UFC 191, principally the young fighters on that card that we're looking at, that we're hoping to see something fun out of. We're going to look back a bit on Holloway Oliveira, even though that card was all of 2 weeks ago, um, and talk about some of the better performances on that card, maybe some of the people who failed to impress a little. And we'll also talk a little bit about TUF and maybe some of the other roster moves that DFC's made since the new TUF season got announced, and we've got a new batch of fighters to talk about from there. I think I'd like to, haven't had time, but I'd like to really look over everyone at some point and pour over it a little, see who looks like they're any good, but maybe even I don't know, maybe even waiting for the first round to finish on that before doing that would be a good idea, just so that we have a list of everyone who's going to be actually in the house and moving potentially onto the UFC rather than going through all 32 and then having half of them immediately get kicked off the show. So, but we'll give a couple precursors just because there's a couple fighters on there that I think we both really want to talk about. Starting off, though, let's just jump back a couple weeks and talk about this former card first, because there's really not a lot of young talent on UFC 191. So I want to go back to this Holloway Oliveira card that was really stacked and told us a lot of different things. Most namely, I mean, Max Holloway is still young and he continues to impress, but he's been around for a little while now. I think the biggest fight I want to talk about, honestly, is Misha Serkinov, who looked exactly like he was supposed to as the one of the best things coming up at light heavyweight.
Yeah, I mean, like that was a really excellent performance from him. We got to see exactly what he does well in taking guys down and then making them pay on the ground, and then we got to see a little bit of a stand up. Really fantastic all around performance, and seems like a guy who could slot right into the top 15 of that division.
Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed with his stand up in his willingness to exchange and take a punch and go for flying knees and some other stuff like that. He seemed a lot less wooden than he has on the regionals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's nice to see a guy like that come into the UFC and really open up as a performer as opposed to kind of, when we see guys, they tend to look more wooden in their UFC debuts, and he seemed really loose and ready to go.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. That was a great performance from him. Somebody I have a lot of high expectations for. Otherwise on the card, probably the other best performance of a fighter that I'm really looking at for development in terms of development is Olivier Aubin Mercier. Frankly, he fought a really smart fight.
Yep, he fought exactly the sort of fight that he needed to. He really wasn't in trouble for any point in that fight, except for one stint where he was holding onto a single leg and needing
Yeah,
some shots. And even then, we don't really see fights get finished in that position once people aren't already hurt, unless it's heavyweight. Like
yeah.
the only time I can think of is like Travis Brown has finished multiple opponents from that position. That's pretty much it.
I'm trying to think. I think it was like Jake Hecht or somebody like that. Like there was one fighter that got a really like flashy knockout that way, and who's no longer in the UFC, or the guy who got knocked out is no longer in the UFC either. But there was somebody, but it rarely
Yeah.
happens.
If nothing else, for Mercier had a really strong showing, looked excellent, and the only real complaint you can have about his performance is that he got so focused on the hand fighting from the back that he forgot. It seemed like he forgot at times you're allowed to punch on the ground.
Yeah, I think it was just about maintaining control of somebody who is dangerous enough that had he given Sims a lot of time and space to work with on the feet, who could hurt him or, give him a lot of chances to get back to his feet. And oftentimes, even like even Damian Maya has talked about how he has often shut down his ground game just to keep fighters from getting back up and getting out from under him.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those like 50-50 weigh your chances thing. I think it was just like it was a tough fight with nothing to gain for Mercier.
Hmm.
And so the best thing you can see him do in that fight is get a really safe win.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the way he won. Like I said, it was if you're looking for something to complain about, that might be the only thing. But other than that, he looked fantastic. Really excited to see him moving forward.
Absolutely. Otherwise, Nikki Thrills did some Nikki Thrills things. Not a big highlight, low light there. I mean, it's fun to watch him win. I'm always happy to see him get a ridiculous win that he probably shouldn't have got.
It
And
was such a Nikki Thrills moment.
it was. And now, and actually, I guess one thing that happened, and I don't really know what to make of Valerie Letourneau, but she's now a title challenger. And she's one of those fighters that I don't know that I could call her a prospect because she's been fighting off and on since 2007. But she really only has started her MMA career in earnest in 2011. And so it's really hard to tell exactly what she's going to end up, like where she should be in terms of development, in terms of her long term potential. It does kind of seem like her game is really fitting together better now than ever.
I would agree with that. She looks really solid and definitely benefited from training at a high level camp, whereas Morose's lack of high level training really showed. It was Morose is like the epitome of like a textbook example of like a sprint grappler where she has a couple transitions she really likes and she has a particular end game she's really good at, but the rest of her grappling game is just not there right now.
Yeah.
And it really got. I feel like that the lack of depth to her grappling game got very much exposed. I think the lack of depth of most of her game got shown pretty strongly there, and Valerie came away looking like $1,000,000.
Yeah, I mean, this was honestly the fight I expected her to have with Joanne Calderwood.
Mm-hmm.
If we're being real, like this is what I
Yeah.
expected to see from that. I will say that Morose has generally shown herself to be a very, she has shown in her past two fights that she is really a boxer to be reckoned with. But this fight also showed that if she's not the bigger, more physically imposing fighter out there, she can be matched punch for punch. Like
Yeah.
she hit Letourneau at 2 times for every time Letourneau hit her, but Letourneau knocked her down or like
Mm-hmm.
wobbled her with every shot she landed, whereas Moreau's just kind of pecking away.
Yeah. Another interesting thing coming out of this card, and we didn't talk about this at all ahead of time, but Frankie Perez retiring after the biggest win of his career, with the state of everything in the UFC when it comes to sponsorship money and things like that. Do you think we're going to see more guys, just more young guys, just deciding the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
I kind of feel like that. I mean, I think we're going to start seeing more older fighters decide that as well. I think we already are. We're starting to see guys who have had a long track record. I'm thinking like Tim Kennedy, Brendan Schaub.
I was going to mention him as a guy that he's been saying a lot of things recently, and some of them have been grabbing headlines, but he's been talking a lot about how his podcast has been taking off. And I think on the Anik and Florian show, he talked about how it's just he's not really looking forward to getting back into the cage to the point where he's seriously considering retiring just because he can make money other ways now.
Yeah, I kind of am. I kind of consider him in my own personal record keeping thing that I do on Bloody Elbow of like who's active and not. I'm just about ready to bump him into the inactive fighters section of guys who have not officially retired but are probably not going to fight again anytime soon.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think guys like that, and then what we're also seeing is Josh Thompson fighting out his contract and just looking to move on, do something else, or fight for Bellator. I get the feeling that more guys at the fringes, at the low end and at the high end, at the
Mhm.
beginning of their career, at the end of their career, are going to be looking probably a lot harder at like just how likely do I think I am to be about to make a lot of money or achieve a major goal. For Josh Thompson, it's like, just how far am I from a title shot? You know, how much sense does that make for me to be fighting on a like 10 and 10, like on 10K sponsorship for 30 and 30 or something.
Yeah.
And for guys like Frankie Perez, it's like, well, I'm making 10 and 10 right now and 2.5 grand in sponsorship money. And how likely is it that I'm going to be a lightweight title contender?
Yeah, and if we're to be believed about Frankie Perez, he's very into the coaching side of things and owning a school side of things, and we've seen guys like that stick around in MMA for a long time and kind of make their name and really kind of build up their profile. And I think Frankie Perez just did the math there and said, you know what, I've done enough. I've won a UFC fight against a fairly big name. And I'm not going to make enough money to justify the amount of damage I'm going to put on my body. I'm going to step out and I'm going to do what I actually like doing, which is going to make me a decent living anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen the same thing from Jordan Meehan too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously he had a much longer career behind him, but I do wonder. Like, I remember, I think it was a couple of years ago now. I wrote an op-ed about how we had finally seen the death of the weekend warrior in MMA,
Yeah.
where like guys who weren't super like just totally, and I don't even mean like not invested, but like if you were,
Full-time trainers.
yeah, guys who had other jobs or guys who just weren't that athletic, just
Yeah.
don't have top end athleticism, but work really hard.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not competing anymore. And this Reebok deal may be kind of squeezing out like some of the other bits of that too. Like we're really getting a tighter grip on, you really, really, really have to want to and be able to do this and have a good shot at making it.
Well, and it pulled out some of the incentive for people, like you said, it pulls out some of the incentive for people who are kind of they have the ability both physically and mentally to commit to it, but it's not something they're all about. It's
Yeah.
not like who they are, and and I don't, and I think you're not at the point where you think this is necessarily a good thing either, that those people are being pushed out, because you can get some phenomenal fighters from those people. Sometimes sometimes that they're just as fun to have in the sport as the people who absolutely love being in a fight. Sometimes the professional hitman sort of fighter is a lot of fun to have.
Well, and I don't even know. Like, I don't necessarily mind them going. We're not at a point where there's any kind of lack of talent in MMA. I think more what I just lament is it's a sign that even for the guys who are devoted full time, there's just less money. I
Yeah.
mean, people are getting out of it. These fringe competitors are leaving because it's worth less to them, and that means that it's worth less to the other fighters as well, to the people who are staying with it. And I think that's kind of where what that concerns me more than Frankie Perez going,
Yeah.
because Frankie Perez is not a bad fighter, but he's a lightweight.
Hmm.
UFC lightweight is 100 people, or lightweight division is 100 people deep right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too, because we've already seen a drop off in, I mean, we've seen a market drop off in the ability of MMA to draw in elite wrestling talent from the U.S. Like there's been a noticeable drop off. I mean, from going back to like the early days when the first wave of wrestlers really came into the U.S., the MMA world got a big influx of wrestlers at one point, like that whole Team Quest crew being really high end, accomplished Greco-Roman wrestlers, and then it kind of started becoming a home for all-American wrestlers who weren't good enough to make an Olympic team, but were too competitive to quit competing. And we've kind of seen that ebb off. I mean, we haven't gotten a big class. I mean, it's on and off, but I feel like we could see less and less wrestlers coming into the sport
I think that's more of a function of just how big the UFC's gotten, that those people make up. They just make a smaller portion of the talent pool. I think they're still coming in at the same rate. It's just that now so many other people are coming in with them that they stand out. Like you notice them less. I mean, like we still get Kamaru Usman, who's a D2 champion and was, working with the national team, and but he's now one of 100 welterweights instead of one of 30 or 50 or 60.
That's true, but I just wonder. It'd be interesting to look back and see how many All Americans on average, or like like all conference wrestlers, were coming to
Yeah.
going into MMA versus now.
Well, I think part of it too, we could say, is that Bellator is now like they are headhunting every serious top end wrestler that wants an MMA career is getting serious headhunting from Bellator.
Yeah,
So that could be skewing things too a bit.
that's true.
So I don't know. I still think there are plenty of young and new wrestlers coming in. I think it's just
I also think it's not as automatic for wrestlers as it used to be to just be
that.
in and be able to take people down and things. I think
Yeah,
I think
that is
generally I think generally speaking, it's been overstated for a long time how easily a wrestler's wrestling translated per se, as far as more so their athleticism translating. And I think it's getting less so and less so as the sport goes on.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if at some point, I mean, we're already seeing some backlashes, so I don't think it'll ever quite happen. But it'll be interesting to see at some point how close MMA just becomes to small gloves kickboxing, because everybody can grapple all right and everybody can wrestle all right, and so that part of the game just becomes less noticeable. I mean, I don't know. I could see it happening more. I think but we, like I say, we've already seen some of that, some of the like the evolution of the metagame and how people expose new holes when they do that, with like backtake experts getting a new life with the amount of guys who just automatically give up their backs every time they try to stand back up to their feet.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's interesting to see because, like, who knows? We're seeing the Sambas starting to come into MMA, and I think the way the current MMA metagame sits in terms of grappling, about getting to all fours and then trying to get up, like, plays perfectly for judoka and Sambas, because and wrestlers too. That's exactly the kind of game they're used to playing.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it's evolved, because with every shift that happens, I think it opens up unexpected avenues as
Mhm.
fighters, because there's only so much you can learn. There's only so much you can take care of. There's only so many parts of your game you can train up.
Yeah,
And as the sport evolves, camps tend to gear towards the evolution. And as we've seen, like, we've talked about with the Black Zillion, sometimes they just skew way off that evolution to like, well, the thing you do is when you get put on your back, you get back up, you give up your back, and you stand up as quickly as possible. And so we see a lot of Black Zillion fighters getting choked out when they give up their back. And it's just like, you know,
the pendulum will swing back at some
yeah,
point, but it'll be cycles of things that are successful.
yeah. I mean, just the amount of evolution that still has to happen with striking to get it to a really high level.
Yeah.
It's still such a huge gap to fill,
Hmm.
that I think we're really talking about more of sort of like getting to an equilibrium point where
Yeah.
now all the high end fighters have to be as good as strikers as they are grapplers and wrestlers.
Hmm.
Um, Not a lot else I really want to talk about on this card. Elias Silveria disappointed pretty hard, as did Rogerio de Lima and Chris Beal and some other fighters. But that,
Isn't Eric Silva like still 23?
yeah, Eric Silva, 23, young man Eric
Perpetually,
Silva.
perpetually 23.
Yeah, I kind of I like I talked about this the other day on the Vivisection, but I kind of worry that John Dodson is about to suffer the same like Eric Silva perception, where
Or
people are like, "Oh, John Dodson, he's tiny and childlike, and so he must be 25, and he's still this like prime contender, and he's pushing 30 in like 10 or 11 years in the sport." and he depends entirely on speed.
Yeah, I heard what was it? Listening to I think Connor Rebush from Bloody Elbow and Heavy Hands said that he expects Dodson to just have a sharp drop off at some point in his career when his speed ebbs a little bit, and I totally agree. As fighters go who rely on like a physical attribute like John Dodson and his speed covers up a lot of holes, and as soon as he loses a step or two, I think we're going to see a sharp decline in what he can do in the cage.
Yeah, I don't know. I already kind of feel like he wasn't that much faster than John Moraga and Zach Makovsky in his last couple bouts.
Yeah, I mean he's 30. It should start to happen soon, and I think he made the comparison to like not comparing them as fighters, but kind of as like just Roy Jones Jr. and how Roy Jones Jr. just fell off a cliff when that speed disappeared a bit and that reaction time like just lost its edge a tiny bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be what we're seeing with Eric Silva too. There, he talked. I think he's spread some rumors. Some people close to him have spread some rumors about him being injured for his last fight. But at the same time, like there gets to be a time when fighters like him, you rely on your physical ability and you fight long enough, and it's just not going to be there for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let's turn our attention to this upcoming card. There's not a lot of young talent on it, but there are a few fighters that we want to look at. I think probably the fighter I'm most singularly excited for, even coming off a loss, is Paul Felder.
Yes. Yes, most definitely. Paul Felder's a lot of fun. I got to see that fight live in Chicago, and it just kind of felt like he got sucked into kind of the you hit me, well, I'm going to hit you back harder. And oh, you threw a spinning shot, I'm going to throw an even cooler spinning shot sort of contest. And I very much feel like I'm forgetting who his coach is. His coach is this. He shares a coach with Donald Cerrone, right? Donald Cerrone's Muay Thai coach.
He's been training with Donald Cerrone lately, but mostly he's out of the Renzo Gracie Academy, the same one that oh damn it, who came up out of that?
Yeah, it's Philly, but
yeah, it's a Philadelphia.
I know he's got a standing relationship with Donald Cerrone's Muay Thai coach, whose name is escaping me in this moment. I have a feeling after that fight, he was sat down and they had a conversation about a little bit of ring craft, and he's going to blast Ross Pearson. Speaking of guys who kind of fell off a cliff a little bit, Ross Pearson has a really distinct skill set. He's an excellent pocket striker, but he's not really good at forcing the pocket, and he's not really good on the outside. And Felder's really good on the outside, and Ross likes to dip levels and change levels as he moves in, and he is going to meet one of Felder's knees at some point because Felder throws incredible check knees. So I think Felder's going to look really good in this fight, and this is a great bounce back fight for him.
Yeah, especially just because Felder, he's big and stupid tough, and he hits hard, and he's reasonably fast. He's not super fast, but he's reasonably fast. And Pearson, as much as I like him, and I've always been a big fan of Ross Pearson, he's just like, his feet aren't fast, and that's what really gets him in trouble. Is that he gets in the pocket, he starts moving and dipping and punching and slipping, and sooner or later, like even the best guys, the absolute best fighters at doing that, get hit. Or if you're Anderson Silva, you do it a couple times, and then he would get out. He was really light on his feet, really fast, was able to just go in, slip a couple shots, suddenly be way out at range. And Pearson doesn't have his feet aren't quick enough to just pop right back out of the pocket. And so he gets kind of stuck there. And Felder is the kind of unpredictable striker with a lot of power and toughness that can eat a couple shots and then, deliver a huge counter knee or a hook or, a spinning back fist that catches Pearson off guard. And I expect Felder to look pretty good in this. So I think one of the other main prospect bouts that we were looking at was Corey Anderson, Jan Blachowicz.
Yeah.
Blachowicz, not so much a prospect at this point. He's been around for 8 or 9 years. I mean, he's probably closer to the tail end of his career, frankly.
Yeah.
Um, but Corey Anderson is very much a young prospect getting thrown to the wolves and told to try and make something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is he got knocked out by Gene Volante last time, correct?
Yep.
And now he's getting Jan in his debut, and while Jan's definitely kind of on that the end of that bell curve we kind of see for like fighter development, where now the decline starts. Um, this is a tough match for Corey because he's still a very raw fighter, and while he's going to enjoy a lot of physical advantages in this fight, uh, when you're only 6 fights into your career, facing a guy this experienced is a tough task, and seems like the kind of fight that a prospect loses. Just looking at it, I'm not sure what to make of this fight. I think I this one's tough. I
Yeah,
think 2 weeks ago I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago I got like a short notice call onto a podcast and got asked to pick fights, and I picked against Corey, and the more I thought about it, the more I'm leaning towards Corey.
I picked Anderson, and I'm picking him just the big reason is output.
Yeah.
Jan Blachowicz is a low output fighter. I mean, that fight with Jimmy Manuwa, where Manuwa was on one knee and was basically just trying to like, okay, I will just pot shot this guy from the outside and coast out a decision on my bum knee and then go home. Blachowicz, like I don't think he had that excuse. He just sat there and lost a decision. And that's something that has dogged him. I mean, I actually think he's probably about as athletic, and as big and as strong as Corey Anderson. But Anderson is aggressive, and he's aggressive all the time, everywhere, constantly mixing up his game, going into the clinch, working there, working from the outside. His boxing's improved a lot. And I just don't know that Blachowicz has the aggression to do what Volante did. Because for all of Volante's faults, he is a kind of fighter that will stay active, stay in your face, and keep popping strikes out there and combinations out there in the hopes that something will land.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think his lack of aggression could be a big factor. And Anderson, if nothing else, gets after it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've made enough hay with his nickname at this point that it doesn't need to be made fun of. But there's something to it. The guy gets after it.
He does. I hope that I basically just hope that he doesn't like even win or lose this fight, and he certainly could lose it. I think Blachowicz is a much technically better fighter and more well-rounded and well-prepared. But either way, I just hope that Anderson doesn't get ground out early and like where his development is stunted because he fights too many guys that can beat him before he's ready.
Yeah.
I mean, it oftentimes fighters work through that adversity. We saw Max Holloway do it, certainly,
Yeah.
but sometimes they don't. I mean, especially you look at like the Pride days, and
I was gonna say Charles Oliveira, the guy who just lost it. Like that was a guy who, man, it seemed like getting thrown to the wolves really stunted his growth.
and he's back near the top 10 now. But I don't know that. I mean, he's back in the top 10, near the top 5, but I doubt that he'll ever quite hit the heights that people thought he might. And maybe that's just the reality of where he always would have been, but it could also be something to do with him continually getting thrown in over his head and coming up short.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, light heavyweight's really not good for that in general. Like you're just gonna have that happen no matter what. Otherwise, straw weights, Paige Van Zant, Alex Chambers. This is
Who? Who?
Alex Chambers,
No, the first one.
Paige Van Zant.
Yeah, who's that?
I'm not playing this game with you, Tom. Not playing this game with you.
Yeah, no, obviously. Paige Van Zandt, I feel like is like at least I feel like I'm surprised Paige Van Zandt's so far down the card in terms of like I know MMA fans generally don't want her to be as popular as she is, but she's at least traffic wise, she kills it with MMA fans.
She's the pay-per-view opener. I think that's actually a pretty good
I
slot.
actually, yes, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, she's being put in a position where she's expected to put on an action fight, and frankly, I think she's got to step back in terms of competition to do it.
yeah.
Chambers is small for 115 pounds, and not a great athlete. I mean, kind of a kick first striker with a bottom grappling game, and those are like generally the two least successful skill sets at the top of MMA.
A little bit.
Yeah, I
Yeah, no,
mean,
Van Zandt's gonna roll. She's gonna look good at doing it, and and then she's gonna get a bump. I think. Yeah, I don't think anyone's disagreeing that she's the next big women's MMA star in the making at this point. As long as she keeps the train on the tracks.
yeah. It's funny though, because I do get the feeling that she could be sort of a what's a good comparison for this? Because it doesn't happen that often that somebody is like really beloved and popular and never champion.
Hmm.
Like I'm trying to think of what a
Like
good
like a people's champion sort of deal.
yeah, like a people's champ. I'm trying to think of what would be a good example of that in MMA, where somebody's like really popular, even maybe more popular than the champ, and not good enough to win the belt.
I'm not sure. I don't know if that's really happened all that often in MMA.
Because I think if anyone has a good chance of being that person, Paige Van
Yeah,
Zandt has a really good chance.
with Jędrzejczyk at top that division, it's going to be really, really tough.
Yeah, because Jędrzejczyk, I mean, like Van Zandt's been fighting since 2012, so she is still just barely into her career. She's now right at the 3-year mark of her
Yeah.
career, and you look at Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and she may be 5 years older, no, 7 years older than Van Zandt, but she has been fighting for 1 month longer.
Mm,
So every bit of development that Van Zandt's doing, Jędrzejczyk can potentially match stage for
yeah.
stage. The only prayer that she might have is that Jędrzejczyk might get to the age sooner where she feels like she wants to go have a family or do something else and have another career in her mid-30s than fighting.
Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, like Jędrzejczyk probably has just as much time to work with as Van Zandt does.
Yeah. I would agree. I think it's gonna be a tough. Becoming champion will not be easy for Van Zandt.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder, especially, I mean, even like Claudia Gadelha is a little further along, but that's like, if Van Zandt gets rushed too quick to the top, and this is certainly not a fight that will do that to her,
no.
then she will meet women who will beat her right now.
Yes. Yes. There's definitely people who can beat her in the division. It's a good division.
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying it's a good division.
Yeah.
There's a lot. There's a fair amount of concentrated talent in that division.
Yeah. And I do think she'll get a title shot at some point. I don't think there's any like people are like, oh, Van Zandt overhyped and all that. It's like, no, she's a top 5 athlete. She will become a top 5 talent,
Yeah.
and she will get a title shot at some point if she sticks with MMA. But whether she ever has the skill to beat the champion, especially considering that they're both at their best in the same place, which is the clinch, and Jędrzejczyk is a lot better there.
A little bit, a lot bit better.
Yeah. So that may be a tough that may be a tough row to hoe for Van Zandt in the long run.
Yeah.
Especially with like no 105, 125 division for either of them to jump to.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see because it's fascinating that now the UFC's got two biggest stars in terms of like interest. Two of them are in women's MMA. I mean, Conor McGregor is the other big one
Hmm.
for them. But I mean, traffic number. I mean, again, we obviously can see internet traffic numbers, and Van Zandt's getting pretty big.
Oh yeah, she's definitely. I would say that maybe with Misha Tate alongside her, Tate, Tate, Van Zant, and Rousey are the biggest names in women's MMA in the UFC.
Yeah,
Outside of that, it's probably Cyborg, and then Jędrzejczyk is running
and
up in there
yeah, and
slowly but
Cyborg.
surely.
Most of Cyborg's I think pop right now is just purely off of saying bombastic things directed at Ronda.
Yeah, but I mean, even when she wasn't, and it was
Yeah,
just her knocking people out, her videos
oh
always
yeah,
did well, and she always drew some interest. But Van Zant, people aren't going to see less of her over time. I don't think, no matter
no,
how, no matter whether she ever owns a title or not. Otherwise, Jessica Andrade and Raquel Pennington are fighting. Andrade, like they're both still fighters that are developing. This isn't a matchup I'm terribly excited about since we've already seen it, and I don't really like seeing. I don't know. I don't like rematches that much because, frankly, I think that combat sports, with very rare exceptions, like the whole idea of a combat sport is you get one shot to fight somebody, and on that day, if you're not better, you're not better. Everybody
yeah,
moves on. You go your separate ways, and that was your chance to prove yourself. If
yeah.
you
It's
couldn't
not. It's
do it,
not. I'm kind of down with that. At least in professional combat sports, that like there needs to be a reason to do a rematch, not just
yeah,
because like I don't know. Let's put these two together.
yeah.
And I'm
It,
not saying that that's where the UFC went with this, but it just seems like an odd match to make. And Pennington, I don't know. We're talking about women's bantamweight. It's in a sad state right now. It used to be one of the big. It used to be the women's division for a
yeah,
while, and man, as Ronda has risen, the the weight class has fallen.
yeah. I mean, she's really
I think
separating the wheat from the chaff in a hurry.
I think part of it is the dominant champion factor. Where whenever there's a champion that rules over a division for an extended period of time, it tends to weaken the division, even if it's just a perceived weakness.
Yeah,
It tends, but even then, I mean, you look around at like trying to put together 15 fighters to put as the top 15 women's bantamweights in the UFC, and you start scraping people who have like 3, 4 fights pretty quickly.
yeah. It is a very weak division, and part of that is that Ronda's chased people to the fact that the UFC doesn't tend to like to splash out for veterans
Yeah,
means that Ronda has chased people to 145, or like Marlos Conan, who is just like, I'm gonna go fight at 145 and make money in Bellator, and Cyborg, who like it never was at 135, but like it has closed down this idea like no vet is gonna take not much money to fight under Rousey,
yeah,
like Tanya Evinger over in Invicta and stuff like that. It's like she can be champ over there. Why come to the UFC on a 10-10 contract just to lose to Ronda Rousey at some point?
yeah.
So they have to build everyone from the ground up, and they're finding out that there's not that much to work with in terms of building material.
No. But they have Ronda, who quite literally is going to do numbers
Oh
like
yeah,
against anybody at this point. I don't think that's debatable. I think at
yeah,
this point it's pretty obvious to people like, oh, I don't like you got to do the cyborg fight to really hit it with Ronda. Like, no, you don't. You don't have to anymore.
no,
And the Ronda cyborg fight would likely be really really big, but you're not the gap between what she does now and the cyborg fight has shrunk. Like the
yeah.
gap between her and some random person versus her and cyborg has shrunk.
It's shrunk to the. it's shrunk enough that I honestly do wonder about that. Like maybe it's then way maybe it's way bigger. Maybe she goes from like 1 million to 1.5 or something. But if she doesn't, I mean, she can do 1 million fight. She'll probably do 1 million fighting Holly Holm. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
probably do 1 million fighting Holly Holm in Australia.
The people that I know that watched the last Ronda Rousey fight are people that forget like casual MMA fans. They're people that have never watched another MMA event,
Yeah,
like are barely aware of MMA existing outside of Ronda.
yeah. They don't know who Cyborg is.
Yeah, I mean, like the people. I know one person who's not an MMA fan who heard of Cyborg because she got brought up on like an NPR story about Ronda, and like they mentioned that there's this one other girl out there that she hasn't fought yet.
Yeah, and that's it. And maybe that would sell a little more, but I don't know. Either way, we're far afield on that.
Yeah,
Andrade, Pennington, I don't know. Andrade is the fighter I'm much more interested in. Pennington certainly could win, but that's kind of why I'm not a big fan of rematches. I don't really like to see fighters that are just kind of get another shot just because there's nothing better to do.
yeah.
Um,
Welcome to women's bantamweight. They're running out of fresh matchups in a hurry.
yeah, I mean the fact they couldn't sign somebody new for this fight just shows how unfortunate, how ugly it is out there. Um, and otherwise, I mean, Clay Collard, Tiago Tractor, we could talk about that, but I don't really.
I don't really feel like either of them are prospects at this point.
No,
Kind of like
Tractor's
Cal-
been around long enough that he's just probably not in general, and
yeah,
Collard is just super raw. It would be kind of like talking
it's
about fly. What was it? Who was the boxer out of Explode that burned,
yeah,
crashed and
yeah,
burned so horrendously?
yeah. But it's like we're talking about a guy like Howard. Like technically speaking, is in his like sixth year of fighting.
No, he's
Professionally.
only been fighting since 2011. He's fought a
Yeah,
lot,
but
but
man, yeah, he's already got over 20 fights. He's got 20 fights at this point. That's a lot. That's a lot of it's a lot of ring time or cage time, as it were. Yeah, I think Howard wins this fight, but I don't know. I
it's
don't.
not really worth getting into. Let's talk a little bit about Tough. That's a much better use of our time.
Oh God, that's a sad statement.
I know. Tough 22. I do want to talk about, like, maybe after the first round and the initial everybody getting weeded out, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about just who is, who's on it, who made the cut. But there are a few fighters that we want to mention just right off the bat. Um, Big one I know for you is Ryan Hall, and I'll let you explain that because to me, Ryan Hall is a fun grappler I've seen a few videos of and not much else.
Well, I mean, there is that. Ryan Hall, in terms of like in the grappling world, is while not the most accomplished guy, he was a purple belt world champion. He took bronze at ADCCs as a brown belt, and never really did that much as a black belt. I mean, he competed, but he kind of had one foot out the door of competitive jiu-jitsu to a certain extent because he wasn't thrilled with the rule set. Um, just really like a really cerebral guy who really breaks down his game and how he fights very well. So if nothing else, he's a guy that is generally well liked in the grappling community and is considered to be better than his just a glance at his Wikipedia page would suggest. Um, Trains out of TriStar, which I think is the perfect place for him, and I think in terms of trying to make it as an MMA fighter, I think TUF is the perfect venue for him because I'm not sure he was going to get a ton of attention any other way. And he was struggling on the regional circuit in the sense of trying to find fights, just absolutely struggling. I do have some contact with people at his school, and I do know that he had a number of contracts that fell through when opponents just suddenly withdrew from bouts or things like that, and just really couldn't nail down a fight, mostly because of his reputation as a grappler. Um, At least that was what they were saying, that guys just didn't want to get in there and be highlight reeled. So in general, if you're going to see Ryan Hall fight, you're going to see a guy with a pretty rudimentary striking game, a better than expected wrestling game from what a jiu-jitsu guy, and then really nice guard passing leg lock interplay, and then from the bottom, just a wicked guard triangle game sort of guy. On TUF, I think that's enough to win a couple matches at the very least, because you're not going to be dealing with dudes who are deep when it comes to grappling, and it's just going to be a matter of him just kind of dragging dudes to the ground. I think, especially in the TUF format where you get 2 rounds and you're not exactly getting a full training camp, you just got to fall back on your strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Hall could make an interesting run and be kind of like a little bit more interesting version of like a Rolly Delgado or someone like that, going back to the TUF, or the Tim Crayer, sort of like that presence on TUF, with a little bit more articulate camera presence, and then a ton of blinking. Just the blinking, Zane, the blinking.
Uh, I'll be prepared when I don't watch it, because I don't watch TUF, but
I
I
don't
will
watch
have to watch TUF because there's just not that much fight footage out there on Ryan Hall. I've seen like 1 or 2 fights of
it.
his.
Yeah.
So I will end up having to watch it just to kind of get an update on what he's doing. But yeah, it is the kind, this cast, I gotta say, in general, is the kind of thing I like to see out of TUF. Like, there's a lot of guys in there who have some good records that maybe are not that appealing to the UFC, or just like they're not guys that the UFC would otherwise be looking at for whatever reason. And they are trying to fast track their way. And rather than spending another 3 years trying to get that big perfect win that gets them on Joe Silva's radar, they're fast tracking. And they're, especially guys like Ryan Hall, I love to see, well, why, for a guy like him, why piss around on the regional circuit for 2 more years, 3 more years, and maybe pick up losses when you can find a quicker way? I as much as I don't enjoy watching TUF, I think it does its job of getting guys into the promotion that wouldn't otherwise get a shot pretty well.
It is also noteworthy that it seems like the European side of it, just generally speaking, is a more experienced bunch. Like, and that kind of
Yeah.
speaks to our whole thing that the European circuit, man, it takes a while to get noticed over there.
Yep, it really does. One of the guys I'm really excited about, speaking of that European circuit, Jamil Chan is in there, and I am super hyped because he's like a less technical Dutch Wanderlei Silva of the better days of Wanderlei Silva. All Muay Thai, all power, all aggression, all the time.
Yeah, that's an exciting one. I'm glad to see him getting a shot too.
Yeah, I hope that he makes it past the first round and hopefully into the second round at least, just so he gets in the door, because I feel like he's the kind of fighter that, especially if a big camp can take notice of him and pick him up and bring him over, he could really make some noise with with the right kind of training, especially in his wrestling game, which still his wrestling and grappling are basically don't get taken down, and if somebody tries to submit you, throw them off of you. Those tend to be his grappling skills. So
one way to do it.
Yeah,
not always repeatable, but it can work once.
Exactly.
It is also notable that, like, I think we're seeing, especially like, I think Hall made a very shrewd choice here in making a lightweight season. While he could potentially be smaller, just the fact that he's not going to have to cut weight, like, almost at all, is going to be good for that, because that's also a huge factor on TUF, is the weight cuts.
Very true. It could, I definitely could see. Yeah, I mean, I always think guys who don't have to cut as much weight, guys who have very specialized games, they tend to do better on TUF in general.
Yeah.
Tends to be the generic, well-rounded big guys that struggle almost immediately because they have to go through some grueling weight cut on short notice, and then they're in there just like with that plan of, oh, I'm just gonna see what my opponent's doing and react to it, and their opponent usually is like, well, I've had 10 years of wrestling training. I'll just take him down and beat him up
Yeah.
for 2 rounds.
Yeah, well, and then it's also I want to see what my opponent's doing because I tailor my game to my opponents usually
Yeah.
with a training camp, and then I have 2 rounds to make that work. When I'm basically giving away the first round, trying to figure out what the other guy's doing.
Yeah. Which is also tends to be why you see a lot of bad fights on TUF, because
Yeah.
guys are in there trying to figure out just what the hell their opponent's doing, and when both of them are doing that, they're just watching each other. Otherwise, there's, I think Mehdi Baghdad was a regional, I want to say RFA champ, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
And Sean Carter, and I don't even know if it was, he's been in Cage Warriors. He may have been a champion. Saul Rogers was a young Cage Warriors fighter. That Artem Labov, obviously Cage Warriors 2. This whole, like, the momentary, I guess it's slowly being resurrected at some point. I still haven't heard anything about a next event for Cage Warriors, but I think their CEO is back now.
That's good.
After leaving the company.
They're one of the good ones. It'll be good to have them back.
They are, if they come back, but that the death of them has sort of left a few guys with, without a place to go, and we've seen a few of them now ending up on TUF, which is a good sign because Cage Warriors they always did a good job picking talent.
Yeah.
And also a name to watch on the Faber side, I know, just out, straight out of the gate, is James Jenkins, who is a Sarah Longo fighter and Ring of Combat champ, I believe.
Oh. I was gonna say there's also a Polish fighter in there. I recognize his name.
Yep.
Yeah, who's another
Marcin Wzorsek.
Yeah, was one of Arnold Allen's final losses before getting into the UFC.
Yep, beat Arnold Allen. So
yeah, just out Arnold Allen. That was the fight that really got me wondering if Arnold Allen was one of those things that he's really young, but man, he needs to bulk up because he just got muscled around in that fight.
Yep, and since then Arnold Allen's looked great, but
yeah, since then he's looked fantastic.
But it does say good things about
Marcin
Wzorsek. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm not even bothered. He's Marcin.
Yeah, Marcin. That makes him somebody to look out for. So there's definitely some interesting talent in this. Like I say, after the first round, we might want to get into it a little further, talk about these guys a little more. But I think that pretty much covers us for this week.
I was saying, we want to talk about Sage Northcutt being signed?
Oh, yeah. We'll talk briefly about Sage Northcutt before we cut out of here. UFC signed a 19-year-old karateka, Sage Northcutt, with a long background in karate point fighting as a kid. Sort of a youth traditional martial arts celebrity.
Huh. I did not. I guess I read your thing. I didn't realize how big he was in the karate world.
He had when he was 9, he had magazine covers and stuff like that. So he was definitely if maybe only for a very brief time, kind of the face of youth karate in the U.S. or a face of youth karate in the U.S. And since then, I think he had a couple of Disney acting roles because of it, and some Disney TV. I mean, not a movie or something, but so he's kind of. I think somebody put it best to me on Twitter, calling him Sage Manzant.
Yeah, he's a well put together guy.
Yeah, he definitely has that same super clean cut, super blonde, super all American look to him.
Yeah.
And thing is, though, he's a hell of a good fighter. I mean, that's why we're talking about him. Is that he's probably one of the very, very few fighters I've ever heard referred to as Machida-esque, who actually has a style that in some ways mirrors what Lyoto Machida does.
Yeah, although I agree with that. Although his more recent fights, he has started channeling a bit more of Gunnar Nelson. I feel like he's been more his last couple fights. It's been get in, take down, take position, and he's been playing more of a positional game on the ground. And I don't know if that's going to continue or if that's him just kind of trying out like a
Well, he
different
does
skill
train
set.
out at Gracie Barra Caddy down in Caddy,
Yeah,
Texas, which I don't think is a great long-term place for him. I hope he gets out of there because, I mean, I don't know. The only other notable fighter to go through there was Lauren Murphy, and she ended up needing to go to the MMA lab to be competitive in the UFC.
yeah. His wrestling's improving. I'll say that. His he was hitting some takedowns early in his career just based on pure athleticism, and now they're starting to clean up his technique a little bit. But I agree, guy like that with that physical talent, if he wants to really do something in the sport, I feel like his best shot's going to be like getting in with a big camp and not in like a local like Gracie Baja in Texas.
Yeah, I'd really like to see him go to like AKA or
Yeah.
some place like that. Honestly, I mean, I don't necessarily think as much as I like what the Black Zillions are doing. I don't think that he would need to go somewhere like that where because I wonder if his striking game would get a little too broken down in a system like that. But
Yeah,
maybe something like AKA or ATT, a team that is really kind of very like will take anyone and round out their game.
yeah.
That's
Maybe I think Luke Rockhold would be an excellent one for him to kind of mirror a little bit.
Yeah, he's got better hands than Rockhold, so
Yeah,
that Northcutt is definitely a very interesting prospect. He's the kind of fighter I expect the UFC to end up probably pushing pretty quickly. I don't know that he'll end up getting hard fights, but I could see him in that Paige Van Zant role where like he's on pay-per-views carrying somebody who has no name value, but up there just because people want to see him.
yeah,
You know.
yeah.
And he's fighting in at lightweight. I thought he was coming in at welterweight initially, but it turns out he'll be down at 155. So that'll be interesting to see how far he goes there. He'll be a big lightweight. He's not a small dude. And on that note, I think that does finally mean we've covered everything for this week's Prospectus. Thanks everyone for joining and watching with us. Thank you, Tom, for being here. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find both of us at Bloody Elbow. Please give us a like over on YouTube and subscribe to MMANation.com. Both those things help us out a ton. And you can find us over on SoundCloud and iTunes and all that stuff now, too. We are going to have 6th Round and Knuckle Up and all the other video shit we do. So watch all that. Watch it over and over again. Click all the ads, whatever else you want to do. It all means something to me. So thanks, everyone, and tune in next week.